Hi, I'm Ching Higley, Acquisitions Editor on Asian Studies at Brill. Here I'm with Professor Gungwu WANG from National University of Singapore. Thank you so much, Professor Wang, for taking the time. And as you have known that Brill has recently digitized the Chinese Students Monthly, the magazine published by Chinese students in the United States during 1906 to 1931. So we have made this complete journal into a online and full-text searchable product. Could you please tell us to whom this magazine will be useful and in what ways?
Let me begin by saying that it was very useful to historians of Chinese intellectual and scientific history in the first half of the 20th century, who saw the authors, the young students who went to the United States, return to China to bring their latest ideas, to try and make China more modern and more scientific and progressive. And so those writings were very serious, addressed to one another, but they were meant to encourage those students in the United States to focus their attention on those matters which will help the development of China. So it came from a very, I would say, patriotic spirit on the part of the students. And I think what is interesting is that it came to an end. It came to an end when the Kuomintang came to power and nationalism became more aggressive in China. And somehow the idea that you learn directly from the West became no longer acceptable, not so widely acceptable. So that drive to learn from the West faded somewhat, although it continued, but it didn't become so obvious. And then, of course, there was the Civil War, there was war and all that. This journal was actually appreciated by historians of the generation of Chinese who brought ideas back to China. And I know of people who have used it, but of course I'm also aware that there was no complete set around, so it was very difficult. I, for one, have never seen a complete set. I've seen it bits and pieces, but I've seen quotations from other scholars, and I realized how much people depended on it to get an idea of where these bright young students who went to America got their ideas from and what they were interested to bring back, and the debates among themselves about what is important and what is not. So I think as a source of understanding their generation of scholars, it's very, very valuable. Then what's interesting to me is that since 1978, with all these new thousands of students going to America and elsewhere to learn from the West in a very similar way, but even more hungry. These are people who really have been, who felt they were deprived of the opportunity and now they were there. Many of them encouraged by their teachers to go back to the old universities that their teachers had studied in, and they are really enthusiastic. But the position has changed in that these people are less clear about what they want to bring back to China. And many of them don't actually come back. They go back and then they learn and they realize that some of those things in the West don't quite fit what China wants. And so they are more ambivalent because they want to learn, but they're less certain about how they can help China. And some have decided not to go back to China or help China indirectly by writing, but not themselves returning. But what they write, of course, will be read by the Chinese in China sometime. And those who don't come back are then divided between those who want to use that knowledge that they've learned outside to help China directly by writing, or those who feel that they want to use what they learn to tell the Chinese what is wrong with China and what should be learned. And so they are divided lot, which is not true in the period of 1906 to 1931, when I think almost all the Chinese students who went there were really patriotic and wanted to bring back knowledge to help China. So the situation has changed. So it's quite interesting to contrast what is being done since the 1978 generations of Chinese scholars with the 1906 to 1931 group. and what are the things that have attracted them, what are the things they are now learning which they do not learn in the past, and to what extent China's needs are very different. China's needs in the 1910s and 1920s was just about anything. Anything from the West would be helpful. That was the approach by many young students. Today, I think people are much more critical, they understand, they can distinguish, they are much more discerning as to what really they think is important, but they're also more committed sometimes to the values out there. If they feel that the values out there are actually progressive and more important and more progressive than those in China, then they feel the need to actually use that as a critical ballast to tell the Chinese people what is really true about the West. So the whole attitude has changed. But to be able to see that in the 1910s and 20s and how that has changed, I think it'd be very, very valuable to contrast that. Because today people don't have a journal like that. They are now publishing in academic journals and intellectual magazines and all kinds of commentaries and so on. So the range is much greater and the audience is different. In the early days, they were writing for one another, other students. Today, they are actually writing for the world. They're writing for the American audience, for themselves, as well as for the people in China. And so the range is so much greater, and the critical mind that is operating today is of a different caliber and a different level of.
Thank you very much. And also, I heard that among the Chinese students in the United States back in 1920s, 1930s, there were some very influential intellectuals like Hu Shi, Xie Bingxing, etc. Do you think this magazine provides important primary source material for scholars right now who are studying those people, and also on the development of modern China? Do you agree?
I think that will be very helpful, because what they tell us is not so much their mature thoughts, but the period they were learning, and what was attracting their attention, what they were getting out of the debates among themselves, and how they felt, how they made decisions, the selections from what they were learning, which they thought would be very helpful to China. That debate is not captured in their later writings, because that's what they wrote for them, among themselves. So I think that's a very important difference, because when you mentioned Hu Shi, most of us, Hu Shi wrote a lot, and what we know is what his mature writings, he came back and he wrote a lot of things. But we don't always know what it was like when he was a student in America and arguing among themselves. So to know the origins of his ideas and how he evolved them from his reading. Of course, he did have a very good diary, so he had a lot recorded anyway. But even that, I think his debate with his friends in the journal and all the others who replied. Another thing which I think is quite important, quite a few of them were scientists. So today the scientists write very professionally for technical journals. They don't join in the debate so much. But in those days they were not the same. The scientists who went there were very much caught up with the debate about the importance of science and the scientific method, the scientific thinking. So a different kind of thinking involved in that. So I think that part of it is also very useful, because it's an engagement of every kind of intellectual in a close debate among themselves for the future of China. Today, I think the young students tend to be much more professional and separated into very distinct scholarly realms, and they don't communicate as much as before. It was a different, in that way something was lost.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome. I'm delighted that it's been published, and finally we can see the whole set.
Yes, we are also fortunate to have this whole set. Thank you.